Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Industry Research at S&P Global, and today we're kicking off our CEO series, where we get some insights into how businesses are putting AI to work. We lead off with a critically important intersection, AI and energy, with Sean Kelly. Sean is the co-founder and Chief Executive Officer at Amperon, an AI-powered energy forecasting and data analytics company transforming how market participants forecast, plan, and operate in a rapidly evolving grid environment. Sean has been at the forefront of the energy trading industry, bringing together deep market expertise and entrepreneurial drive to modernize energy forecasting. Sean, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you on. So often on the podcast, we talk about the technology aspects of AI. Infrastructure, data management, data pipelines, a lot of the nuts and bolts. But we wanted to raise the conversation up a level to really talk about how enterprises are really leveraging AI to deliver value. And I guess before we get too far along, could we start with what problems are Amperon trying to address and how are you going about it?
Actually, I'll set the stage of a little bit about my career and how long I've seen this industry, being 21 years. I literally walked out of Texas A&M in 2005, and in June, 2 weeks after that, walked onto Tenasca's trade floor as a power trader. And so I've seen this market from the last 21 years. And the problems that we're solving today are more than I ever would have thought possible back when I began my career. But it's the reason that we started Amperon. So with this, the grid is changing way faster than the tools. Too much is still done in Microsoft Excel. We talk about extreme weather. I mean, we all just lived through only a week or two ago. 35 states had some semblance of a record here as we sit here going through the winter of 2026. With those records, there are things that people weren't expecting. They didn't know how renewables would act, which actually acted quite well. They definitely did not know how data centers acted, which are also on good behavior. But all of these things make the problem significantly more difficult. We have better data now. We have smart meter data getting reads every 15 minutes, as opposed to the dog chasing the meter maid back only a handful of years ago. And so because of that, so many people are flying blind. They're working with Excel spreadsheets that are tens of thousands of lines. And if one box goes down, your forecast and hopefully not your grid goes down. The other thing that we've seen is this was a $1 million problem. I live in Houston, Texas, and unfortunately with Winter Storm Uri, we saw it be a $1 billion problem. And so these bad forecasts are costing utilities so much. So the problems that we're solving are much more than we could have ever thought possible. And unfortunately, I think, Eric, when we have this conversation in 3 years, more problems will have arisen.
Well, we already see it on the world stage, right? I mean, if you take a look at grid stability issues, we saw it in Spain, where there were grid dynamics that were a real problem, leading to a prolonged outage. It's not just weather, there's so many different components, because you were talking about, the integration of higher percentages of renewables, great to be able to bring those online, but yet they have a very different dynamic on the grid than, traditional generation environments. So
Absolutely.
There's a lot that's going on. I guess with energy markets becoming more volatile and data dense, you're mentioning that, hey, we've now got a lot. We've got meter data that we can actually get to. I guess, where does traditional forecasting break down? And how are you leveraging AI to really change what's possible?
Yeah, so traditional forecasting, I mean, as we discussed, you had once a month meter point, and you've got some crazy stories with certain utilities where they wouldn't check the actual meter for a year, and you'd get some insane bill that no one saw coming. And so now we're at least getting 15-minute granularity. There's still some lag. We hire engineers who are traditionally from big tech, and so they come in and see our data, and they don't think it's as big data as we do. For those who worked at some of the hyperscalers and other companies of, I guess, similar pedigree and data ingestion is what has our iPhone heard from this conversation, probably a little bit more than our smart meter has. So we look at it from that standpoint, and that's one of the data pieces. Another data piece that's changed drastically is weather. when we came into the market and the company only began in 2018, most of our peers were tying you to the nearest airport. I thankfully do not live next to an airport. Wife's a super light sleeper. This would not end well. And so with that, we went and used much more granular data. So we actually used open source commercial building data and then population density weighted it across the United States. So that if you're in the middle of Boston, for instance, you're going to be probably about 1, maybe 2 kilometers from a data point. And if you are in the middle of the desert, you're probably going to be 10 or 20. And so that's how we looked at it. We also realized then from a data standpoint that weather's changing very fast and no one's infallible. And so we have, in some semblance or variation, 6 different weather vendors that we are a customer of as Amperon. And so we're always looking for what's the best in class data. As you see press releases now every month from whether it's a Google or NVIDIA or someone with billions, arguably trillions of dollars to throw at the problem. So the data is getting much better.
I was going to say, it's just interesting that you're managing some of the data volume pieces by population weighting, because you could get data points for probably not every square inch of the planet, but really high resolution weather data. But then you'd have volumes of data that would be really difficult to manage. But interesting to actually match that in ways that are going to be more closely tied with energy consumption.
Absolutely. I need to keep this product also affordable. And so I don't want my Microsoft Azure bill to go through the roof. Sorry, Microsoft. I want to be a little cognizant of that. And again, we want to be able to have the forecast produced in very, very granular fashion and quickly. And so we push out our forecast every single hour on the short-term basis, and actually for renewables every 5 minutes. And so because, as you know, wind and solar change very fast. And so we've got to have that 5-minute granularity of a forecast, whereas on the demand side, in the United States, we have every hour granularity. But actually in Europe, the market's just recently moved to 15 minutes, and you've got to stay up with the markets. And so that's been an edge for us, being able to move quickly and just ingest that much data. So it's been a good problem to have. And also people care about this now. We're a dinner table conversation, and that helps you attract those engineers that are working at best in class startups. My co-founder sold a hacker company to Intel, was like early stage at Etsy, had worked at Planet. I mean, just top flight companies across the board. And he had an interest in energy and had been able to attract some of his peers, because Houston, amazing city, good energy talent, great food, but tech talent has a little be desired compared to where we have hubs in terms of Seattle, New York, Boston, even, and some California. So we've been able to be fully remote and hire just best in class.
Well, and it's a challenge that has got so many different impacts, as you're pointing out. And if we think about hard problems to solve, it gets seen as challenging. 2, it's seen as impactful in so many different dimensions. So great combinations in terms of hopefully what that indicates from the talent pool piece. But I'm wondering, you're talking about how you're actually building this. What's an AI native energy forecasting system look like? I mean, compared to a lot of the statistical models that have been the norm. We come from a background in which we've been doing some level of machine learning in its various forms for ages. You're identifying spreadsheets, and guess what? There's still a lot of work that gets done on spreadsheets.
100%.
What that transition to AI really is a much more foundational shift. What's that look like?
Yeah, the answer is that no forecast wins all the time. And so we're not throwing linear regression in the trash. We're taking that and supplementing it with AI gradient boosted trees, multiple deep learning models, secondary models. Our team of data scientists, about 10 PhDs, are literally looking at whatever the latest and greatest, and then they put that into our ensemble. And so the ensemble is going through and automatically weighting and retraining every single hour when that forecast comes out to make sure that we're pulling the, correct percentage or correct weighting from each model. So any model that you see published from Amperon is going to have 4 to 6 different models underneath, and that's per weather vendor. And as I mentioned, we have up to 6 weather vendors, and then we take all of those and ensemble them again. And so I joke that it feels like we scramble eggs twice in terms of have the ensemble of the actual models and then the ensemble of the different models output by weather vendor. And so it's been very interesting to look at that outcome, and it's proven to be much more accurate than any one model can stand on its own. And let me tell you, we are not doing this by hand every hour. They built a really impressive platform, a meta learner that goes in and does this automatically as the models retrain every hour.
I mean, it seems like you've got to be able to, one, deal with the volumes of data you're working with, two, to be able to generate that kind of velocity in forecasting. If you think about what you're putting together, that's impressive in terms of just simply, data density, model selectedness. And I would also venture to guess that you're doing, model swapping on a relatively regular basis, just simply because, model capabilities are evolving so rapidly. I guess, how do you manage this with, the kind of computational capacity you need to run it? You mentioned keeping an your eye on a bill. One of the things that actually a couple previous episodes ago, we were talking about the need for FinOps within AI and how complex that is. The fact that you've got to balance what your output actually looks like. Now, hopefully you're also dealing with models that are becoming more efficient in other aspects, but I'm curious, how do you work that out, and what are the things that are the priorities in terms of how you evaluate that?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot there. And I mean, from our standpoint, I wouldn't say it's as much model swapping, it's more model addition. And so we're bringing in multiple models and then letting the meta learner go from there. We do very in-depth back test because obviously when a model changes, people need to know how it would have acted during a special event. I mean, and again, we have these events. Our first model went live in November of 2018. And there was a very early cold snap in Texas that happened that second week of November. Happen to remember because A, it's when we went live, and B, it was like pretty much my birthday. And so with that,
sharing
that was
birthday
call.
candles with ERCOT, right?
Exactly. So we saw that happen in ERCOT in November of 2018. Then you fast forward and you had what happened with like Winter Storm Uri, and you still want to train off of, even though Amperon wasn't a company, the polar vortex that happened across the whole East Coast back in winter of 2014. And then again, we had a little bit of issues in winter of 2015. And so you still want to be able to train off that, even though Amperon didn't exist. And so these are the type of things, again, by looking at so much historical weather. And I mean, early in my career, what we looked at from weather was very heavily weighted on hurricanes. Because as you recall, if hurricanes hit the Gulf of Mexico, then natural gas prices shot up. Now, if hurricanes hit, they actually often drop because demand destruction due to the chaos that they cause on the land and the power outages. And so that's what we looked at early in my career, was that hurricanes were bullish natural gas, and now they're bearish. And also everything's not weighted on natural gas anymore. I've run about 36 combined cycles in my career. And you see those still, but you don't really need a forecast for a combined cycle. It either works or it doesn't. You know what's going to happen. You got 3 options. You got cold, warm, and a hot start, and that's pretty much all it is. And there's a little variability there, and that's it. You look at wind and solar, and it's very different. One of the things I'm very proud of the team for is our West Texas wind call during this last event during Winter Storm Fern. We were pretty much where the actual output was, and ERCOT came in around that 1,000 megawatt mark, and it was closer to 5,000 or 6,000. They obviously wanted to make sure that they weren't calling on generation that couldn't show up because of icing, and icing was lower than expected. But nonetheless, our scientists just wanted to give out what the correct prediction was. And so there's things like that we learned from, whereas Winter Storm Uri, when that happened back in February of 2021, ironically enough, almost exactly 5 years before Fern, there was really bad icing. And so the wind farms were actually becoming demand just to stay warm and to ice, to try and get the ice off so that they could produce generation again. So it was a very different construct across the board this time than last. And I think that next time we're gonna see a slightly different construct again, which is why you need AI as opposed to somebody with their finger on the pulse.
Always a new curve to get thrown. Well, you mentioned the ISOs and a lot of the data that's coming out of them. I guess we seem to be in such a different environment now. I mean, energy forecasting really used to be fairly niche, in terms of sort of predicting grid and load and such. But it's really become central to grid reliability now. And the other side of this is also market performance. What do you see has changed in the dynamic around that?
Oh, I mean, so much in terms of the forecasting capabilities. The ISOs are also running multiple models. I mean, they have obviously, their goal is to keep the lights on. Amperon's goal is to have the right forecast. So we're slightly different incentivized, but it's still a 100-person startup can move at a much different pace than I guess, like government-backed kind of like nonprofit whose goal is to keep the lights on. And again, I totally get it. I've worked at large corporate before. I've worked at startups before. And so again, just how we're incentivized is a little bit different. But yeah, how the ISOs are forecasting is changing. Also, I mean, this is about as long as I've made it without talking about data centers really in depth in the past year. And so, I mean, you're looking at this massive, like gigawatts of load coming on and wondering, is it going to behave or do they have to get their compute out to the customers who are paying for it? And we did see pretty good reactions by them. And we also saw the Department of Energy issue some statements on their side. So again, things that happened in 2026 that didn't even happen in 2025.
And you're talking about the kind of things that happened in this most recent storm. If you take a look at what seemed to be shifting attitudes towards expectations about where data centers are going to play in the grid. I mean, you got PJM, calling, the general idea of calling on not only reducing load, but maybe data centers should be actually net generators and all this. Talk about a very different dynamic in terms of what's happening and what that really means in terms of where that fit is. We're definitely in very different times these days.
It definitely is. And I mean, I think that if you have that large load coming in that may or may not have a varying effect on your electricity bill, if you know they're going to be a good neighbor, then you are more likely to want them in your backyard during this next event. And so I completely understand it. There's an amazing, I believe, chemical company here in Texas called Formosa, and it's down on the coast. And they will push their generation back out to the grid. This has happened like a couple of times. And so you'll see the ERCOT map, and then there's the prices will all be red, and then there's one little pocket and the prices are blue because a large chemical factory is pushing it back to the grid. That's the type of neighbor that you want. People probably don't want a chemical factory in their backyard until they live through a large winter storm and stayed warm because of that. And so data centers, I think, going and being good actors is going to make people a lot more accustomed to this, because if not, we're going to lose this AI race. And I'm personally not okay with that.
And nothing like having a neighbor that helps keep your lights on to change attitudes. But interesting shifts in terms of where this is going. I'm curious in terms of your clients and the way they consume your data. I mean, one of the things that we provide, of course, S&P provides all sorts of data in all sorts of different forms and formats and such. And we see what's been a gradual evolution in terms of the kind of data products that we provide. I'm curious from Amperon's perspective, presumably you're not shipping spreadsheets to clients, but how are they moving? And especially now as we're looking at agentic capabilities starting to become a bigger part of a lot of the decision-making process that's going on. How do you see your clients consuming, and how's that shifting?
At the end of the day, you need to meet your clients where they are. And screen real estate as a trader is a real thing. I could still set up my 6 screens exactly how I did when I traded. I traded 11 years as an East Coast trader. So I was looking at predominantly PJM and MISO with a little New York and New England, and everything's tied together. So you still need to pay attention to Ontario and maybe a little bit of SBP. And so you still need to look at it from stream real estate. So the thing that we've realized is, again, you've got to meet your customers where they are. And so we have a very impressive UI UX that we're always trying to get better at. So they would approach the data via our website. But also when you're on there, you can click in the top right-hand corner and download a CSV. And so, because at the end of the day, still a lot of this runs on Excel, and there's a lot of spreadsheets and reports that are easier in Excel as it stands today. We also have our more forward-thinking customers that never log into our website, and instead they just pull everything via API. And so they'll just pull as much as possible. This is very, very heavily with our European customer base, just due to the fact that they are primarily trading the short-term power programmatically. And so I had read around 85% of short-term electricity in Europe is actually traded like algorithmically. And so they don't have time to download a spreadsheet. And so and we also have other partners such as Snowflake, where you can go and actually access our data that way. So what we realize is that we need to meet I think the last customer counts 163. And we need to meet each of them where they are, because different people have their own workflow. And me walking in and being like, no, Eric, you've been doing this wrong. You need to do it the way that Amperon says as your new vendor. That I can tell you how that conversation goes, and it's normally very poorly.
Clutching that spreadsheet tightly. Well, but you point out what is the reality, which is you got a workflow, you got a process, you got a business model, you got whatever the back end product is. You want to minimize disruption, and yet it's one of the things that my frustrations. We keep sort of hoping that we're going to be able to get people moving forward with a little more automation, getting them moving in terms of how they're consuming data. Interesting to see, though, that the European market pressures in terms of trade are one of the things that are driving automation, and maybe we'll wind up getting there in other global markets as we start moving forward.
Yeah, we're active right now. We have customers in 26 countries, and so we've got to understand the nuances in each of the markets. However, thankfully, a megawatt's a megawatt.
Well, thinking about business processes managed, how should enterprises really be thinking about changing the way in which they use data? Especially, we see so many of our clients who are really looking to capitalize on the value of AI and really maximize data. I'm curious for general ideas about how organizations really be thinking differently about using data and putting it to work in businesses and how they deliver value.
I mean, it's something that people really, really need to pay a ton of attention on. And not every single person at said organization, whether it's a big utility or a wholesale trading firm, needs to be on this, but there definitely needs to be a team internally to make the company's life more easy. And so my fear is that too many people are going to avoid this, and then they're going to have that million or tens of millions or $1 billion negative outcome that's going to force that change. And it's not good for the industry. Nobody in this industry, when we're trying to keep the lights on, bankruptcy is good for no one. No matter which if it's a competitor, if it's a peer. I mean, you look at the biggest one in history being Enron, that affected every other company. And so it's not good for anyone. So we need to all work together. And unfortunately, data adoption is probably the top of this list, that you need to do this and not learn it the hard way and have that multi-million-dollar hit.
Well, we're getting to a point, as you were pointing out, we've got a lot more data available, both on the operator side and on the market side. We just need to get people a little more motivated to put it to work. But appreciate all the wise words and the insights. This has been great, John. Thanks for being on.
Thanks. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Well, that is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us. And thanks to our production team, including Sophie Carr for on the edition and Kira Smith on the marketing and events teams. Please keep in mind that statements made by persons who are not S&P Global employees represent their own views and not necessarily the views of S&P Global. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, because there is always something next in tech.